Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for Ask a Biller. Today, we will be covering insurance fraud and how to avoid it. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. Um, if at any point during the presentation you lose the image, the slides go out, or you can't hear us, please let us know by writing in the chat box through your GoToWebinar window. As far as the presentation, we will be handling the questions that were sent in ahead of time first. And then if there's time, we will be able to address some questions from the audience. And another note about this presentation, we will be speaking in general terms about insurance. So we will be talking about specifically insurance fraud. We will not be talking about how to bill insurance in SimplePractice. For information on how to bill insurance in SimplePractice or for help with your SimplePractice account, visit support.simplepractice.com and reach out to our customer success team. We also have a plethora of live classes to walk you through how to set up your account with SimplePractice. But Barbara, who is my co-speaker, does not work for SimplePractice and will not be speaking specifically about about billing in our system. All right, so let's talk through the agenda. We'll be here for about an hour together, and a reminder that this presentation will be sent out after to anyone that signed up. So if you know any of your friends who couldn't make it, no fear, you will all be receiving a recorded version of this. I'll introduce our speakers, and then, like I said, we'll be going through the pre-submitted questions first, and then if there is extra time, we will go over some of the questions that you are able to ask today. We had a ton of people sign up for this webinar and a ton of questions that varied from some about insurance fraud and some not. So if there's some time, we will talk about other topics related to insurance billing. But for now, go to the next slide. All right, so my co-presenter is Barbara Griswold, who is a licensed marriage family therapist. Barbara is a private practice consultant. She is a rock star of insurance, author of Navigating the Insurance Maze, The Therapist's Complete Guide to Working with Insurance and Whether You Should. Barbara's been in private practice for 30 years, and we are so lucky to have had her co-host some of these webinars with me. Thanks so much, Barbara. I'll let you just say a few words.
Thanks. Hi, welcome everybody. So excited about how many people signed up. We had over 2,000 people sign up for this webinar, so welcome to all of you. And I want to introduce my co-host, Maggie Gleason. She is a rock star there at SimplePractice. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her over time, and she's been working in the healthcare industry for 5 years, cares deeply about making health services accessible to more people, and says to her, insurance education is a vital element of public health. Right on. She believes that empowering providers to take on insurance will open the door for many more people to receive care. Amen, right? All right.
Yes. So thank you all for being here. So another note, we did receive a lot of questions about different topics within insurance. So we do have a resource that you can go to access all of the webinars that Barbara and I have done in the past. So if you have questions about dealing with denials, couples therapy, or anything else that isn't specifically related to insurance fraud, please visit simplepractice.com/askabiller-series, and you will be able to access all of these videos. To unlock them, you'll need to enter your email address, and then you'll be able to view all of the previous webinars that we've done on various topics. And this webinar will be added shortly after we're done. All right, so let's get into the questions. All right, so our first question is as broad as they come, but how is fraud defined?
Great question. So, it's going to vary slightly, but I pulled out a definition that I think is really kind of a good overview that you're going to find, which is insurance fraud is the act of deceiving, misrepresenting information, or concealing information with the intent to receive benefits. And remember that both patients and providers can commit health insurance fraud. Now, I pulled that out because I want to talk about several parts of that. Number one, insurance fraud can be any kind of deception, any kind of misrepresentation. I think that's the word that I often like kind of check myself with. Am I misrepresenting anything about it? We'll talk about this a lot, some examples. Or concealing information. So even not giving information to an insurance plan that they should or want to have can be fraud in certain situations. And again, we'll talk about some examples. But fraud can even, the second part of that, you'll see fraud can even include the failure to maintain adequate records to substantiate the services that you're billing for. So, again, not every situation is fraud if you keep bad records, but an insurance may say that, for example, if you don't have records backing up the billing that you're putting in, they really have no way of substantiating that you actually provided those service, and they may question whether that they actually took place. So I just want you to kind of have a general idea that fraud usually involves some kind of misrepresentation that from the provider standpoint or the patient standpoint that they did in order to get benefits. And again, we'll talk about lots of examples.
So definitely a multifaceted topic that we're talking about today, also a very
Yeah.
serious topic. So our next question is, I don't think I've ever intentionally committed fraud. Can fraud be accidental?
Yeah, so this is a great question. In fact, probably one of the biggest questions I do get, like, is this, people call me up for consultations like, can you tell me, like, am I committing fraud? Or I don't think I did, I didn't mean to. But what I would say is that if you've been around a while, like I have, like 30 years, you've probably either committed fraud or been tempted to. And a lot of things can happen. Either you kind of didn't know what you were doing was fraud, but yes, it can be kind of accidental, but it usually can come from that you didn't know better, or it can be that you had kind of a sense of, well, I know this isn't quite right, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. And I kind of put down some thinking problems that get us into trouble. And this is what I see when people do kind of go into the area of fraud. Some of these kind of ways of thinking are what lead us into trouble. It's such a small change. No one's going to find out. The insurance company won't know. Like, I'm just changing this little thing. It's very small. I'm not lying completely. It's just a little part of it is not quite accurate. So that's the kind of thinking that can lead us down to committing kind of a fraud. I get paid so little by insurance. I deserve this extra money. This is the way I was taught to do it. There's a lot of that out there. And again, ignorance of the law is not a defense. We really need to, I'm so glad you guys are all attending because, we want you to learn it the right way and what, and make sure that you are avoiding insurance fraud. I don't need to worry. I'm not on any insurance plans. Okay. Even if you're not on any insurance plans, most of us who are out of network still give out invoices occasionally to clients to submit to their insurance. And right there, you can get into trouble if there's any misrepresentation on those invoices. And here's another one I hear a lot. If investigated, I'll just say it was a mistake. I put down the wrong CPT code, or I put down the wrong date of service or whatever, or I'll just rewrite my notes. This is dangerous, right? I hope you can kind of see that first of all, that can be illegal to rewrite your notes, which we'll talk more about. And, you would be lying if you said it was a mistake. So we certainly don't want to encourage that. So I guess what I'm wanting you to kind of think about is the kind of mindset that can lead to making small changes that you might not think of as fraud. You might think of them as like, oh, it's nothing little, but actually it is fraud. And I hope by the end of today, we'll give you lots of examples. I just want to help my client get more reimbursement or get reimbursed. We are such warm, loving, wonderful people. I would say much of fraud comes from a place of trying to help our clients. And that's terrific, but sometimes it can get us into trouble. And we have to really have very clear boundaries of not doing things that help our clients to the point where you're actually writing things that aren't completely true.
And this was a lot of the questions that we got, and we're going to drill into some of those examples specifically, because I mean, that was
Yes.
probably the biggest theme is, well, what can I do? How can I help my clients? They have to, their plans aren't
Yep.
good, and
Yeah.
so we'll get into that. But next very important question is, what are the penalties of fraud?
Yeah, I had a whole slide on this and I decided I wouldn't overkill you, but the bottom line is it can be very serious. Probably the most common thing of fraud, well, let's just go through the spectrum. It can go anywhere from an insurance company asking for their money back for claims that you've submitted, or that they could ask it for money back from you, or if you're out of network, from the clients. And there could be penalty fines that they ask too on top of the money. Fraud is a serious, it's actually a crime. So, it can be punishable by jail time. It can be punishable by fines. It can, it's a civil or a criminal offense. So, you can lose your license over it. So this is a serious topic, and I'm really, again, glad you guys are all tuning in. Not that everyone's going to end up in prison, but definitely it has some serious financial, and you certainly wouldn't want to lose your license because you did something like this. So,
All right. So what are common pitfalls that clinicians make that result in insurance fraud?
okay. So what I did here, since we have a whole bunch of, this is a huge topic. It's, I left some a little bit further on. I'm going to start with a couple, like 5 or so, and then we're going to down the line talk about more. But here are some common types of billing fraud. These are just related to billing. Go forward. So it seems obvious, billing for a service not rendered. That might seem obvious, but we're tempted to do this. I'm sure we've all been tempted to do this for a missed session. Probably a lot of us out there have actually billed an insurance company for a billed missed session as if the client showed up. So using a therapy code for a missed session. It's so tempting, sometimes you lost income. But that of course would be fraud. You're making it seem like the client attended when they didn't. That's a misrepresentation. Changing the date of a session. You think, why would anyone do that? Well, there's 3 probably major reasons people would do that. Number 1, let's say you have an authorization that is running out, like some therapy needs to be pre-authorized, maybe an employee assistance program. And so instead of, maybe you move one of the dates on the claim to be within the pre-authorization period. Or maybe the client is losing their insurance at the end of the month and you had one in the new year. Maybe you backdate that session, or you're tempted to backdate that session so that it falls within their insurance period, that kind of thing. Another thing that I've seen people do is if they did like a 2-hour session on Wednesday, they put 1 hour on Tuesday and 1 hour on Wednesday so that the insurance plan will pay for each hour. But that's, again, a misrepresentation of when the session took place. So those would be fraud. Changing the CPT code. This is a really common one. I see this a lot. And mostly it comes about with couples and individual. If the plan does not cover couples, which is therapy, which is pretty rare, or they don't cover it at the same rate that they do for an individual therapy session. I've seen that. I've seen a lot of therapists bill as an individual 90837, for example, which is the CPT code for a 60-minute individual therapy, instead of the couples therapy code, which is a 90847. You can't do that. You can't bill for a different CPT code. Vice versa, you can't, bill for a couples therapy session when it was an individual. So changing the code to make it seem like you provided a service that you didn't provide. This is one that's more time sensitive right now, coding telehealth as in person or vice versa. Some people are doing this because some of our clients are have telehealth coverage with no co-payments right now. So even if you're continuing to see them in person, some people have been changing the codes to make it seem like it was a telehealth session to make the session free for our clients. That's not right. And vice versa, some clients might be losing their telehealth coverage with insurance plans as the virus goes on. And you can't keep, if you are actually continuing to do telehealth, you can't then make it seem as if the person came in person. This one's a little bit different. This is network provider balance billing. This is if you are a network provider for any insurance plan, and let's say your contracted rate is $80 with that insurance plan, and your normal fee is $120. You can't turn around and bill the client for that $40 difference. You have agreed with the insurance plan that you will only bill the client. I mean, you will only bill the client, yeah, for co-payments. This is more of a contract violation than fraud, but it's kind of on the line, and you certainly can set yourself up for a complaint if you did that.
And one thing I want to note just on the first four topics that we discussed there is when working with an EHR, we talk a lot about automating your workflows so that it's really quick and easy to be able to submit claims. But one step to take to avoid these sort of pitfalls, as we describe them, is just keeping an eye on your schedule, like making sure that everything that's on your calendar is accurately reflected. That's how you can avoid making these mistakes, like billing for a service that was not rendered, like making sure that you are always recording your no-shows. You're always making sure that telehealth is accurately reflected, and that can really save you a lot of time in being able to batch submit those claims. You can trust that your calendar is correct, trust that your claims are going to be correct.
It is a danger of any kind of practice management software that pre-populates anything for you, is that you have to double check it and make sure that it applies to the next session, that it's accurate. And so be very careful about that, yeah.
All right, so our next question. In couples therapy, is it fraud to bill the health plans of both members for a couples session?
Quick answer there, yes. Almost, unless you have a situation where you bill the primary insurance, and then you tell them about that there's a secondary insurance, and then when you get paid by the primary, you turn around and you bill the secondary, and you tell them, oh, there's already been payment by the first, and here's what the payment was. So that's what we would call coordinating the benefits. But the bottom line is you can't just go to wife insurance and bill them, and go to husband's insurance and bill them for the same session. That's called duplicate billing. So you're basically double collecting for the same session, or helping the clients double collect for one session. So that would be fraud.
And we have a whole webinar on couples therapy if you are interested in learning more about how the correct way is to bill for couples. But our next question, if a client is late for a session or chooses to leave early, can we bill for the entire scheduled time or just the time that they were present? And we had a lot of questions with specific down to the minute. So I think this is a good generalization of that question.
If you're dozing off in any way, I want you to wake up now, because this is probably maybe the number one thing that I see that people are out there doing that could be seen as fraud, and they don't even realize it's fraud. So that's why I put together a couple slides for you on this, because it's such a big issue. It is not enough now to put in your progress notes just the CPT code of the session you provided, or to put the session length. You can't just put 50-minute session or 60-minute session or 25-minute session, whatever. Right now, plans are requiring that you document the actual session start and stop times. Now you're going to notice I use the word actual. The scheduled session time is not the same as actual. So if your client is supposed to be there at 1 and they're there at 1:05, you don't write down 1 in your documentation for the start and stop times. It doesn't include the time you spend waiting for them or for you, time you spend scheduling the next appointment, writing your notes, making phone calls, going pee, any of that stuff. Basically, it's from the moment that you start the therapy session to the moment you end the therapy portion of the session. And what they're wanting, and we are required to do now, is that you document the 102 to 156, and they want you to document this for each progress note to back up your billing. A common kind of fraud is misrepresenting the actual session start and stop times. People who have learned about, oh, I need to put down my start and stop times, are doing things like 1 to 1:55 every session. Now, if you saw, and I've heard of insurance plans coming in and seeing that they ask for your notes, and they see that over the course of 6 months, every session started at 1 and every session ended at 1:55. Well, they know that's a lie. They know you probably were at least 1 minute late on one occasion, So this is fraud because you're writing down times that aren't true. Again, you're misrepresenting the start and stop time. And they're going to expect realistically that every once in a while you're going to have to do a shorter session. Somebody's 10 minutes late, you're 10 minutes late, whatever. And they're going to expect every once in a while to see a session that needs to downcode. You need to go down, if it's an individual session, maybe you're doing 60-minute or 55-minute sessions with a client and they're 10 minutes late, they're going to expect every once in a while, well, for that one, you're going to have to downcode. And what I mean by that is use the code for a 45-minute session. You can't bill for a 60-minute session if you only provided a 45. So let's look at those session times a little bit more. So here are the ones that we get us into the most trouble: the 90832, the 90834, and the 90837. These are the time ranges in yellow. I highlighted them for you. You guys need to be super aware of these time ranges so that when somebody is a little bit late or you're late, you might need to downcode to the next lower one to be accurate, to not be fraudulent in your records and in your billing. And to recoup money, plans are looking closely. This is a big thing that they're looking closely that they never looked at before. And if you've been around like I have 30 years, we never had to write start and stop times. This is all kind of new, but this is a big way that they're now looking to recoup money. So you need to match your session times with your billing. And I want to just add this: it's more likely to occur, this kind of false narrative of when your start and stop times, if you write your notes long after the session and you really can't remember the actual start and stop times. So it's really important to somehow right away at the session, after the session, to write down the start and stop times so that you can write those accurately.
And for those of you using SimplePractice out there, we've recently made an update that makes it really easy to edit that while you're doing your progress note. So it's just up in the top right corner where you can edit on the calendar the actual start and stop time, so you can be as specific as possible.
And I just want to say, I've had people, consult with me, call me from, other parts of the country and just say to me, I've got an audit. They are coming after me because, they think I'm lying because every time I wrote 1 to 1:55. So this is happening and they're being accused of being liars and money is being sought back. So this is happening. So it's a simple thing that you can do to protect yourself. And as I said, the consequences are you're kind of losing credibility if they're seeing that every time is 1 to 1:55. and you don't, and they may start to question your other bills for that client or your other charge for other clients that you have for that insurance plan. And again, all of this affects out-of-network providers too, because anytime that a client, you give them an invoice or a super bill or whatever you might call it to turn into their insurance plan, they can look at all this stuff.
All right, so our next question is, what about after reimbursement or payment from insurance? Can you waive any client copay or coinsurance that is still remaining? And this is a big topic on how can you help clients when you're in a network provider?
Yeah, I understand where this comes from, but we really can't. If you are a network provider, you have agreed to collect the copayment. It's a contract they have with their network, and we have to collect the copayment. So that isn't something that we can waive. Especially, we can't waive it in advance. You can't tell a client, well, you know, don't worry, I'll just accept the part that the insurance pays and you don't have to pay it. Now afterwards, if you've made a reasonable, you've gone to the client, maybe you said, okay, your insurance paid this, you owe this, and you make a reasonable attempt to collect it and the client is not, you know, playing along, they're not paying you. I mean, as long as you've made reasonable and good faith efforts to collect, at some point you certainly can waive debts. But you know, we don't want to be in collusion with the client against the insurance plan or against our insurance contract.
Right. And that makes perfect sense. So our next question is, how can I help clients that struggle to pay and not commit fraud in some way?
Yeah, again, we are a little bit strapped for those of us who are in network. But let's talk about sliding scales. I did get a lot of questions about sliding scales. So for those of you who are network providers, and I'm frankly not 100% sure about this one, but I'm pretty sure. I think you can slide your fee during the deductible period. But if you do that, be sure you reflect the actual client payment on the claim form. The bottom line is you can't say to the client, oh, well, you have a deductible of $2,000. My usual fee with your insurance plan is whatever, $80. But I'll slide it down to 60 or let's say 50 for you. When I'm turning in that claim form to the insurance plan or, you know, through SimplePractice or wherever, you would have to mark your charge for that session as 50. You don't want them having the whole amount going to their deductible, an amount that they didn't pay. So the only amount that can go toward their deductible is what they paid toward it to you. I hope that makes sense. So again, you just don't misrepresent anywhere on the claim the amount that you collected. But the bigger issue for sliding scales is for out-of-network people. You can always slide your fee. You didn't sign a contract with anyone. You can slide it. But the way I want you to think about it is that if your usual fee is $150, you can slide down. You can't slide up. And this is a whole topic, but just kind of quick and dirty overview is you can't say to clients, I have an insurance fee for those of you who have insurance, this is my fee. And for those of you who don't have insurance, this is my fee. Basically what I'm saying is you can't basically misrepresent your fee, inflating it to help clients get higher reimbursement or to have a higher, so those are two different things. You can't have a higher fee for insurance clients. That's misrepresenting your actual fee. And you also can't say, oh, I'm going to inflate my fee to help the client get more reimbursement by saying, oh, $200 is my actual fee. So you have to basically be walking around with an idea of what is my actual fee for my service, that particular service, whether it's a 90837 or whatever. And if your full fee, you might call it, is $150, then when a client comes to you and says, what's your fee? You have to start at $150 and you can't say, oh, you have insurance? Oh, well, then it's $180. No, So I think one thing to think about is basically that sliding scales should not be based on the method of payment, insurance versus uninsured. What can they be based on? They can be based on almost anything as long as they're consistent. So you and not non-discriminatory. So you could say, I base it on the client's stated ability to pay. That's fine. But you have to start at, my fee is $150. And if the client says, I can't afford it, say, okay, what do you think you can afford? That's okay as long as you're doing that with all your clients, whether they have insurance or not insurance. Does that make sense?
Yes, and just to recap, for network providers, sliding your fee during the deductible period means that what you bill to the insurance may be less during that period, not necessarily charging the client less than your typical billed fee. Is that correct? Like that would be charging, billing the insurance less altogether.
You're going to bill whatever the client negotiated sliding fee rate
Right.
was during that, just the deductible period. It's not something I recommend, but if you like really want to do it, okay. We just don't want whatever amount you're putting during the deductible period. You can't be having $100 credited toward their deductible when they only paid you $60.
Right.
That would be fraud. So you have to tell them, yes, I can slide my fee, but it's going to make your deductible be used up slower because it's a smaller amount. So it's really kind of up to the client. But I hope people understood the second part there, which under out of network, which is basically, we don't want to discriminate against people who we don't want to be helping. We don't want to be basing it on insurance versus uninsured. That's kind of
Right.
could be set you up for a complaint, or basically insurance could say you are inflating your fees, what you're charging us.
So you cannot charge more for clients who will be billing their insurance just based on the fact that they will be billing insurance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that that's in itself is, if it's, yeah, you can't, the one that you really don't want to do is to inflate your fee for insurance people. So the question that could be raised, what's your actual fee? And if your actual fee is $150, but your insurance fee is $180, then that's fraud, right?
Yes.
So that's what we're trying to say is it's best to just take your sliding scale away from how people are able, how they're able, because some people who are uninsured have money to pay you, so it shouldn't be, can afford you. So it's better to take it totally away from insurance versus not insurance, and just take it away from, I mean, you can ask your clients to bring in their tax forms, or there could be something else. It could be, I've heard people say, I do sliding scale only for students or unemployed people. You know, you can make whatever sliding, but it needs to be a policy you have. It needs to be consistently applied. One you could point to that doesn't, you know, discriminate against people on the basis of obviously their race or, you know, but it shouldn't be based on method of payment.
Right.
All right.
And as a network provider, you're more limited. That's, I think, the biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
You should not be changing rates.
Yeah, you can't be not collecting co-payments.
All right, so can you give an example or give examples of fraud related to diagnosis?
Yeah, this is a big area of concern that people have. So here are a couple common things. What I would call underdiagnosing clients. So you see a client, maybe they have substance abuse, maybe they have major depression. The one I see it more often is substance abuse. And you don't want to put that on their claim form, so you don't. Maybe you give them an adjustment disorder, or maybe they have, you know, something very severe, you know, major depression or something like that, but you decide, I'm just going to put down adjustment disorder, even though I've fully diagnosed them with something more. That would be fraud, because you're not actually putting down what you clinically believe this client has. And why is that, you know, not right? Well, the insurance plan might have made a different reimbursement decision had they known the full extent of the diagnosis. And more importantly, down the line, and this is just for you, if they ever call and want to do a treatment review, which they can do for even for you out of network people, you've hamstrung yourself, because basically you're like, oh, this guy just has an adjustment disorder. But down the line, when they come and they say, well, okay, you've been treating him for 9 months, why does he still, and I'm not saying they always do that, I'm just saying if they were to do that, for you to at that point, you can't discuss his major depression as easily because you haven't been reporting it. And you're either going to have to like not talk about how depressed this guy is, or what the substance abuse that's going on, or you discuss it and then you have to like, they would probably wonder why you're not reporting it on your claim forms. So, don't get into a position where you're misrepresenting what you're treating. I keep saying to myself, just let the cookies crumble, be honest, and let whatever is going to play out because of that play out. Now, we do this mostly to protect our clients. We don't want heavy diagnoses out there maybe, but again, we have to be honest with what we're treating. And if you have any concerns about, putting those diagnoses on a claim form, you certainly can talk to the client about that, and the client can make the decision about whether, they want that going to an insurance plan. But the bottom line is, you shouldn't be misrepresenting. Another one that we get into a lot is making up diagnoses, or this is kind of the opposite, or putting a more serious diagnosis than the client has to get reimbursement. This is one I talk about a lot in my couples therapy webinars, in that people are saying, is it okay to, pick one of the people there as my identified patient and, kind of make up a diagnosis for them, or other people. And of course, it's not okay to make up a diagnosis, but it's also not okay, in my mind, to say, well, couples therapy shouldn't ever be billed to insurance, because a lot of times couples come in and somebody in the room does have a diagnosis, and to avoid insurance fraud, you put down the accurate diagnosis of the identified patient in the room. So if you meet with a couple, let's say, we'll just use couple, it could be an individual, and you're well, we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but basically, don't make up diagnoses, bottom line, or don't put down more serious diagnosis with the idea that maybe that'll help the client get reimbursement. You be in your ethical space.
Right.
And not writing all diagnoses on the claim or invoice. Kind of talked about this before in terms of, like, let's say the person has adjustment disorder, but they also have substance abuse. And a lot of us would just say, well, I'll just put down the adjustment disorder and not put down the substance abuse, because that's all I need to get reimbursed, and I really want to protect this client's, privacy. But again, the insurance plan might have said, oh, if we knew that about the substance abuse, we might have wanted to talk to you about treatment plan and whether this person should be assessed at another level of treatment. So you can't basically hide things and ask them to pay. So that goes back to the definition of fraud, where you're concealing things.
Right. And I think a lot of this is the idea of working backwards from the payment. You know that some insurance companies may not cover preventative codes, or they may not cover bereavement things, until you want to work backwards on how to still get paid. But I think the most important thing is to work forward, accurately reflect what's going on with your client, and that is the best way to be
Exactly.
honest with it.
People are constantly talking to me and saying, how do I have to basically code this so I can get paid? And I'm always like, that's the wrong question. What's actually happening in the room, and what is the actual code? And then, if you have to inform your clients this may not get paid, the personal growth work you want to do may not get paid, that's different. But don't work back from, how can I code this so I can get paid?
Right. All right, so our next question is, what if I don't find any diagnosis other than something like personal growth or relationship issue after the first session?
Yeah, this is a little off of fraud, but I really wanted to put it in here because we're talking about like, well, don't make something up. Well, then what do I do? This is what I call, that I give my clients the medical necessity talk, which is I have to explain to them what insurance covers and what it doesn't. And so I kind of say something like, well, the good news is, after talking to you and kind of getting an idea what's going on, the good news is it sounds like you've got these strengths and this going on, and you've got a great topic here to work on, improving your self-esteem or improving your communication. The bad news is basically that's not something that insurance would cover. Insurance covers things like, anxiety, depression, insomnia, whatever. I give them some examples, substance abuse. And so I'm happy to work with you on the issues that you're bringing up, and I think that they're really important. But it isn't something that we can bill your insurance on. So let's discuss, basically at that point you start moving into let's discuss paying out of pocket for that.
All right, and our next question, is it fraud to continue putting a diagnosis like major depression on a claim form after a client has improved?
Yeah, this is a great one too. I never know exactly when to remove a diagnosis because people who have been major depressed, hopefully it starts at like severe and then you change the diagnosis over time. So remember to do that one too. And maybe you move to moderate and maybe it moves to mild, but the bottom line is, people who have certain diagnoses, we want to keep monitoring them. Maybe you've moved your sessions to once a month. Maybe they're not still really majorly depressed, but you're just kind of doing relapse prevention. That's kind of how I write it in my notes, like just kind of checking in on them, monitoring them for relapse. So those are some phrases you might want to put in your notes. But at some point, if this person is really out of the woods no one's, not that they're ever really, you have to feel comfortable supporting the diagnoses that you're putting in. So every time I submit a claim, I want to say to myself, if I were questioned about that, how well am I going to sleep the night before the treatment review? And can I back it up why I'm still putting major depression on a claim form? I'd say at some point you're going to have that medical necessity talk, which is, hey, you've done great work in here. You've gotten to the point where, I really can't in good conscience continue to put down a diagnosis that you no longer have. So, I'm happy to keep working together with you, but, I can't keep billing your insurance because, and this is where I say, because that would be insurance fraud and I can lose my license. So I kind of short any kind of pushback from them. I'm just like, this is how it's going to go. Like, so right. People push back.
All right, and our next question is, I just got a records request from an insurance plan and I want to clean up my notes. Is this fraud?
So this is what I get probably 4 times a week. As more and more insurance plans are looking for records requests or requesting records. So for those of you out there, please, please, please start doing really good records. I have a progress note webinar on that I hope that you will check into if you're concerned about your notes. But at any point, a client can ask for their notes. At any point, client's notes can be requested by insurance. If you don't work with insurance, it can be opened for a complaint, for a disability, for all kinds of reasons. You want to have terrific records. Now, when this happens, I can't tell you how many calls I get saying, I'm going to go back and rewrite my notes, or I'm going to clean them up. Is a very nice way of saying I'm going to commit insurance fraud, basically. So the bottom line is you cannot clean up your notes. Your notes are your notes. Whatever you took on that day for that session is what you took on that day for that session. And it's illegal to do that. Now, if you write notes late, which is or make changes, you can make changes or additions, but you have to put the date of the change or addition. So if you want to add something like a treatment plan or something later, but you have to, put the date. So the bottom line is it may be fraud to make it appear that you wrote a note at the time of a session when you didn't. And that's the most common kind of thing that I hear people saying, well, I'll just rewrite, the notes as if I wrote it then. some plans have rules, and I put this one because I really liked it. If an entry is made more than 24 hours after the service was rendered, this is Optum or UBH, the entry should include the date of service, the date of the entry, and the notation that it's a late entry. I mean, probably most of us don't do that when we write a note that's 24 hours later. But I think it's a really, when I actually abide by this rule, which I do now, it keeps me from pushing my notes out because I don't want to write late
You don't
entry.
want to have to admit
I
it,
don't want
right?
to have to write all these things and kind of admit that my note is late. But one thing that one lawyer told me is like, basically, if you were ever in court and they ask you like, when did you write this note? And you say, if you honestly say, well, it was a week later, I mean, they're gonna fry you and say, well, how do you remember anything here? And it doesn't that call into question everything you said if you wrote it a week later. So really need to stay on top of your notes, but also I just want to be very clear that it would be fraud to make anything look like you didn't do it after the fact. So if you do it after the fact, fine, but note the date that you actually entered it, not just the date of service. If you fall behind, I just want to say, don't get avoidant. We all fall behind at times. Get a consultation. You can contact me. We can make an action plan for catching up or for just going forward or whatever we're going to do. But sometimes what happens is that the more things pile up, then you're not doing today's notes and you're still not doing last week's notes. And then you're not doing either one after a while, and it gets pile and pile and pile, right? It's like that mess that's in a kitchen and just gets worse.
All right, so my supervisor told me to put her name on the claim form as rendering provider for my sessions. My name isn't anywhere on the claim. Is this fraud?
So this is a whole area that to me is very gray. I would say in general, and there's a section of the claim form where it says who is the rendering provider in it, and it doesn't necessarily have your name, but it might have your NPI if you work for a National Provider ID, if you work for a group. And in general, whoever provided the services, their name should be there, or not their name, excuse me, their NPI, so it's very clear who provided the services. It can be fraud to make it appear that somebody else provided the services. However, a couple of insurance plans have come out and said, no, when you're billing under a supervisor, that's okay, and put the supervisor's name under the rendering provider. But what I would say is make sure you have it in writing from the insurance plan. I saw Cigna sent an email out to some of their providers, not, I don't know if this is in every state, saying that that's how they wanted it to be handled. So definitely I wouldn't be doing that unless I talked to somebody on the phone and got it in writing that
Yes.
this is how they want it.
And I would also say check with your state
Yes.
check with the licensing board for your state, because those rules can vary a lot in terms of what is allowed to be billed by insurance if you don't have an MPI. And I have run into, just having billed for providers from all over the country, different laws vary a lot state to state. So definitely make sure you check with your insurance providers and then also with the licensing board for your state.
Yeah, I would just say in general, a lot of supervisors are kind of cutting corners about, well, just bill under me, just make it look like I did it, kind of thing. That's fine, that's how they do it. And I just want you to follow that little voice in your heart that says, that seems a little bit maybe not right, and just investigate it, right?
All right, so is it fraud to submit a claim from a fully licensed therapist who has not completed credentialing with an insurance company?
So I think what Jessica means here is just like basically, if I'm not fully licensed, can I still submit a claim? I think, is that like what you interpret that?
I interpret it as she's not in network. So
Jessica, but she's submitting it. Can she still submit it?
Yes.
And what I would say is anyone can submit a claim to the insurance plan, but what they will do is, if you're not completed your credentialing, you are not on the network. In fact, you're not on the network even if you've applied and they send a contract and your application's gone back and forth until it's countersigned and they say, welcome to the network, you're effective as of this date. So anytime in that time or before you've credentialed, I mean, you can send a claim, but they're not going to treat you as a network provider and process it that way. You'd have to see if that particular client has out-of-network benefits, and it would be processed in that manner.
Right. So my take is it's not fraudulent, but you most likely will not get paid
Won't get
as an
paid. Yeah,
in-network provider.
that's a different issue. Yeah.
If they're going to backdate you, then that is something that you would have to chase after. So I always recommend waiting until, like Barbara said, you have that confirmation, you have it signed, you have the welcome packet, you know your start date before you actually start telling your clients that you can bill for them as an in-network provider.
If you really, yeah, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to read the next question, but if you have more to say on that one.
No, go ahead and read it.
All right, so if you realize you made a mistake on an insurance claim and don't correct it in a certain time frame, is that insurance fraud?
Yeah, I've never read that particular thing as fraud. It depends what kind of mistake, right? If you did a typo that affected the benefit outcome, or it really depends what the mistake was. If you got money that you shouldn't have gotten, I would say that that's fraud, and you probably need to follow that up. But I looked that up last night and was trying to figure out, or this week, and was trying to figure out, is accepting an overpayment from the insurance plan actually fraud? And it doesn't feel right to me. So but I couldn't find it online anywhere like that is specifically fraud. But to me, it feels wrong, and it feels like I don't feel okay with that. It feels unethical, at least.
Yes, something that could come back to you, definitely.
Yes.
All right, so what should I do if I accidentally committed insurance fraud?
Yeah, again, it's going to depend what the type of insurance fraud you committed. You may need to submit a corrected claim if you got monies that you shouldn't have gotten, or if you didn't put all the diagnoses. Yeah, for a lot of these things, I think it's just going forward and acting in an ethical way is probably what we're just going for here. But I'd have to know exactly what kind of fraud you kind of committed there, Tyler. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you're asking a general question, not for you, Tyler, of course.
Well, I think the biggest thing is submitting a corrected claim, getting in front of it, and then insurance companies do have fraud hotlines if you do need to report fraud. If someone else in your practice is, there's someone that you are observing who is actively committing fraud, insurance fraud, you'll want to take those steps to address those.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what steps can we take to prevent? We talked a lot about it, but just an overview of how can we prevent fraud from happening in your practice?
Well, I hope just, from what you've heard today, the answers are there in terms of, when you're putting down a diagnosis, be sure that you feel very comfortable with it, that you could back it up, and that your documentation backs it up. When you're putting down a CPT code, be sure that that's the correct one. Most of it, I think, is though about checking our own resentment toward insurance plans, that we kind of try to get away with things like, or because of, we're worried about finances of our own, or we're trying to help clients. You're going to have to just check those instincts to go beyond and watch your boundaries and just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't, do that. I did actually have a client, I think I've told the story before, who brought me tomatoes and said to me that, could you just not put down my substance abuse diagnosis on the claim form? She was very savvy. And did she know I like tomatoes? I don't know. But the bottom line is, stay in that ethical space of yours. Hold your boundaries. You got to be like a good parent where you're like, yeah, I understand, I want to help people, but I need to stay in what's right and good and not do anything that's.
Yes.
So,
and
yeah.
Well, I also think to note that working with insurance is agreeing to work within that system. So
Yeah,
if you harbor that much resentment towards insurance, it might not be the best choice for your practice,
So before we take our final questions, maybe I just wanted to offer these freebies to those of you. I know some people sometimes have to sign off early. These 2 freebies, I have the telehealth door sign for those of you who haven't gotten this already from me. It's a cool thing you can download and you can put it on your door and keep the kids out or the family out while you're working, and it's just a fun little thing. And on the left there, I have a special report that I'm put it together for how to make money without working more, And one of the areas that I see is that missed sessions. A lot of us just don't enforce our missed session policy. And by my calculations, this can cost you, between $7,000 and $15,000 a year. That if you just started enforcing it differently, you could be making more without lifting a finger. So read my report, make more money, don't do any more work. It's totally worth having. And all you need to do is go to the yellow thing there, theinsurancemaze.com/contact, and either say, I want the freebies or mention the fraud webinar. And we're gonna send those to you within the next, hopefully 24 hours. Again, it's
awesome.
theinsurancemaze.com/contact. Mention the fraud webinar. Let me know how'd you like the webinar, if there's any female, and also if you have comments or questions, feel free to follow up there.
All right, so we have a couple minutes and we have a few more questions. Before we dive into the pre-selected questions, actually, Barbara, we got a question from someone that is currently watching that I thought was a really good, relevant question. But if a client thought that they were not actively covered and paid out of pocket for several sessions, but actually was covered, does the clinician who's in network have to then back bill those sessions to provide a refund for the client?
Yeah, I have a whole article on this. Basically, if someone comes in and says, I'm going to pay privately, and either because they don't think they're covered or because they never mentioned insurance, and then later they're like, oh, hey, I see you're on my insurance plan, there's argument out in the field about this. My argument is that I don't know why we wouldn't act as if we wouldn't go back, refund them any extra monies that they paid and bill their insurance, as long as it's not more than 3 months back. I mean, we can usually only get paid for 3 months back. The insurance plan might say the other ones are too old, but if it's usually about 3 months, you can get paid. And I think what happens is in our brain, we're already saying, this is a private pay client, yay, yay, yay. And then we get resentful about paying that person back. Whereas if they had come in the door and said, hey, I'm a Blue Cross client or a Cigna client, we would have given them the benefits and we wouldn't have felt cheated in any manner. So I think we have to just be like, oh, let's imagine that person had come in at the beginning and told me that they had insurance, and I'm just going to go back and give them what they should have paid under. So basically, you're honoring the contract that you have with their insurance plan, which is that anyone who walks through the door or telehealth that you see that's their member, that you will honor your contract with them. So I think you should. Yes.
Yes, I am in agreement. All right. So on the next questions that we have, some of these were questions that we got that weren't necessarily directly related to fraud, but with Medicare, what happens if I get a records review request and my process/progress notes are combined?
So this isn't specific to Medicare. Basically, guys, you should not be, if you keep process notes, which are actually called, HIPAA calls psychotherapy notes. I know it's very confusing, but if you keep psychotherapy notes, and we call them process notes sometimes, these are notes that should be kept separate from the medical record, and they're basically kind of a journal of your thinking about the case or your analysis of the case. And they are, by HIPAA, required to be kept separate from the medical record. So you should not be combining them in any way, because those are afforded, the reason you're keeping them separate is they're afforded a higher level of confidentiality. Now, when Medicare or any other insurance plan asks for the progress notes, they're going to take whatever's in the progress notes. And if you've blended your process notes, you've ruined the idea of having separate ability to say, no, insurance, you can't have my psychotherapy or process notes, which they don't get to get. So does that, hopefully that makes sense, is that don't combine your thinking about the case. I mean, you can write down your clinical decision making. That's part of the progress notes. That can be fine. But if you're just doing kind of diary, like this person ticks me off, or she's bringing up my countertransference, or she's, you know, if they're usually psychodynamic clients, therapists would be the ones who keep process notes. Now, if you don't keep psychotherapy notes, the process psychotherapy notes, all of us have to keep progress notes, but you don't have to keep psychotherapy notes, and most of us don't, so that's fine.
And a note on SimplePractice, they are called psychotherapy notes in SimplePractice, and they are kept separate. So if you do your documentation there, then you should be in the clear as far as keeping those two separate.
I don't recommend that anyone keep psychotherapy notes, and most lawyers I talk to don't, because they still can be subpoenaed. And if you're hiding things in there because you think they're just like ironclad, no, your client's lawyer can subpoena them, or some other lawyer can subpoena them. So depending on what you write, just remember they're still not confidential completely.
All right, so we can hop to our next question, and then we'll wrap up because we're just at time. But is it acceptable to bill 99080 when doing letters for employers or the courts, or to talk to lawyers? Is it acceptable to bill that into insurance?
Yeah, this goes back to you can bill insurance for anything, but will they pay? My guess is that there's a couple things about this code. This code starts with a 99. Whenever you see a code that starts with a 99, it usually applies only to physicians, nurse practitioners. So it isn't usually reimbursed for therapists. Anything that starts with a 99 is an evaluation and management code. So can you bill for it? So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that usually, like, an insurance plan won't pay for letter writing or anything outside the session for the most part. Even talking to school staff, or consulting with one's doctor or another therapist. So I'm going to tell you, sure, you can bill for whatever you want, but depending on who you're giving this bill to, if it's insurance, they're not going to pay. Then you can put whatever code you don't even need a code if you're just billing the employer directly or the lawyer directly. CPT codes are really only for insurance plans.
All right, so that is the end of all of our pre-selected questions. For those of you that are still on, I just want to remind you that everyone will be receiving a recording of this webinar after, I believe you'll receive it tomorrow. So if you missed the beginning, or if you came in late, not to worry, you will still be able to see the whole thing. And then we do have some more webinars coming up. We have an Ask the Experts, an interdisciplinary look at substance abuse, where we'll have a behavioral health specialist as well as a registered dietitian coming together to discuss substance abuse. And then Barbara and I will be back in January and March. We'll be talking about everything you need to know about getting audited, relevant for the start of the year, and then joining insurance networks on March 18th. All right, and then we don't have time for our open Q&A, but
you can join my mailing list. Definitely, when you come to, even if you don't want the freebies, please just come join my mailing list at my contact page at theinsurancemaze.com. Don't forget the insurancemaze.com, and check out my resources there. I've got a lot of other webinars in my book and billing service list and lots of good stuff.
All right, and just a reminder that all of our Askability webinars are now available at simplepractice.com/askability.
And Maggie's dog is talking, so.
And for those of you who have not tried SimplePractice yet, a reminder that it is easy to try for 30 days for free, and no credit card is required. And for those of you that do use SimplePractice and have colleagues that don't use it yet, make sure to take advantage of the Give 50, Get 50 deal by using your customer referral link from your account to share and spread the word about SimplePractice. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Yay, take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, thanks, Barbara.